Hi, I'm Greg Haw. So I am going to go over major enhancements to our PSPE system. So without further ado, let me click on our staging acceptance testing site. It's going to bring up our login screen. I can log in with my user ID and password, but I'm also set up to log in with my IP address. So I'll click on IP login. It says here, you logged in successfully with your IP. So I'll go ahead and click the OK button. And voila, here's our acceptance testing staging site. So here we have PSPE, we have PSPE Osaka, PSPE EPDs, our program directors, and tools for our PSPE system. So the first thing we are going to do is go to our APPE All interface under the PSPE Osaka header. So I'll click here. And to look at our documentation, we can go to the top menu bar, hover over View, go to Documentation, and select Resolving SIS Exceptions, the one with the check mark. So I can click here. So there's a lot of documentation here. I am not going to cover everything here. We have scenarios for acceptance testing here. We have stored procedures and tables for preventing SIS exceptions. But our OEIS team has access to our staging site, and when time permits, they can look through the documentation. So I am just going to cover this topic here, basis for exceptions. So SIS, which stands for Student Information System, pulls PSP comments from our OEIS database from a view that filters on final records. If SIS already pulls the record and we change the reveal status values to something other than final, the system will throw an exception and all processes will stop on their end. So note, the Dean's Office website only has final or replace values and not modified in e-value. Therefore, our focus is only on final or replace values. So we were told by the SIS team not to make any changes to the current system or processes that they worked so hard on. Therefore, we created algorithms in our Dean's Office website to prevent SIS exceptions. So Neha suggested to revise the website so that once a record is set to final, that it remains final. But this would be too rigid. The PharmD advisor, Catherine, and program directors need to be given time to make changes. Therefore, I suggested having a holding tank. As soon as a record is updated to final, it is moved to a holding tank for an nth week before moving back to the primary table. So we have an interface to set the number of weeks that records are held in our holding tank. So while in the holding tank, the PharmD advisor or program directors can edit the final record. This is because SIS pulls records from the primary table and not the holding tank. So to reiterate, once records are in the holding tank, you can edit it however you choose. But once that end date, holding tank end date expires, if it's today's date or greater than today, then that record will be moved to the primary table and it's going to be set in stone. You cannot edit that record anymore. So, okie doke. So I wanted to cover the basic stuff here. So let's go to the very top and let me do a demo on this. So notice here we have Peter Piper picked a pack of pickled peppers. If Peter Piper picked a pack of pickled peppers, where's the pack of pickled peppers? Peter Piper picked. For original comments, for students, they all say Stephen Curry, and for evaluator, they all say Steve Kerr, and that's because we have sensitive data in these columns, and I do not want to show the actual data. So while doing this presentation, this demo. So the first thing we are going to do, let's see. So I noticed that there is no blank reveal status fields here. So there was yesterday and early this morning. So Catherine must have done some updates here. Yep, January 13th, 2022. Last updated, modified by Catherine. So what we're going to do here is we are going to go to our acceptance testing interface right here. So in our acceptance testing interface, I could edit the reveal status regardless, whether it's in the primary table and of course if it's in the holding tank, because it's for testing. So if you look at our landing page, this is our staging acceptance testing site. So once we're done with our acceptance testing and changes, enhancements, revisions, and move it to our OEIS production, in this site you will not see that acceptance testing interface. This interface is just for staging and acceptance testing. So in here, what I can do is I can come here and I can edit this field. So when a record is final or replaced, so replace is looked upon as being a final record. When it's final or replace and it's in the primary table, it cannot be edited. But again, I'm in acceptance testing and I am going to make this blank. Save my changes right here, save successful, and now I'm going to go back to the APPE all interface. Right over here. So it's ordered by last modified date. So that's why you see this up here. It's in descending order. So you see this, what I just made blank over here. And notice that, again, if it's in the primary table, if I click here, you won't be able to edit this, right? But if you see a pencil, that means you can see it. If you see this guy here, this symbolizes that you cannot edit this field. So what I'm going to do here, I am going to click here on this blank reveal status field, and I am going to make this final. So notice something here, that you see this symbol that indicates that you cannot edit this reveal status field. But once I click Save Changes, what it does, it updates the record, and then it moves this record from the primary table to the holding tank. And that's when you can edit that record. So this is our new enhancement. So let me go ahead and click Save Changes. Save Changes, Save Successful, voila. HT stands for holding tank. I have a check mark here, and I have a pencil here, meaning that I can edit this field. If I click here, yes, I can edit. I notice this is in the primary. Notice the primary table, because you don't see it checked here. I cannot edit this, but yes, indeed, I can edit this right here. And if you go to our file menu, you'll see this holding tank start end date. If I click this, it says here, the start date is January 13th, 2022 to January 27th, 2022. This is the end date. So we have an interface to set the number of weeks that records can be in the holding tank. We also have an interface to set the end date, the holding tank end date. For example, you may say, God, 2 weeks isn't long enough. I need to give it another week. So we have an interface where we can change the end date and make it extend that week. And we have an interface to set the maximum end date, meaning that right now I think I have it at December 30th, something like that, 2022, because you don't want to bleed into the following year, right? So you need to have a maximum end date. So we have an interface for that. So let me click OK here, and what you can see here, if you go to View and Reports, if I click here, you'll notice that we have that record in our holding tank. So to start off, it probably takes some time. This is reporting services to show up. So that record is going to be in our holding tank. It's loading right now, and voila, as I said, it's here. So eventually we're going to have a lot of records in our holding tank, because once you update a final or replace record, it goes to our holding tank. So again, I initialized everything here, so that's why we only see one record here. So we're just starting out brand new. So let's close this, and if I come over here to reports and click here on Final Replace System of Records, you're going to see that record here as well. So the very first time you go to reporting services, maybe you're a little slow, then afterwards it just pops up really quick. So what this does, for example, our SSIS packages, which is an ETL, Microsoft's ETL, like Tableau Prep, right? That's an ETL. If it, for whatever reason, if it blanks out the reveal status, we have a job that runs at 5:15, or we will have a job that runs at 5:15 a.m. in the morning. What it does, it checks all the records in the PSPE final or replace table and sees if it's in this record resides in the primary table, because it can reside either in the holding tank or primary table. But if it does reside in the primary table, then it looks for the reveal status, and if it's blank, then it's going to correct it from this table, and it's going to, if it's blank, it's going to change it back to final. So that's the purpose for this. So let's close this guy, and we can look at our history. We have that ability at the user level. So remember, I made it blank in our acceptance testing interface, and I changed it to final. And this is our update date. You can see it here. Everything here is read-only. Let me close this guy. So the next thing we are going to do is we are going to make this exclude. So when I make this exclude and save my changes, it's going to go out of the holding tank because it's an exclude record. So if I look at my holding tank right here, my reports, you'll notice it's no longer here, and that's because the holding tank only contains final or replace records. And the same with this final or replace system of records. It's no longer here anymore because this system of record only contains final or replace records. And we changed it to exclude. If you look at our history right here, we went from blank, I blanked it out in that acceptance testing interface, made it final, and then exclude. So let's close this guy. So again, we can edit this. So what we are going to do is I am going to change this again, and I am going to make this replace. So replace is looked upon as being a final record. So I'll select this, save my changes, and voila, now it's in the holding tank. As you can see here in the report, it's in the holding tank. It's back in the holding tank with a reveal status of replace. And you can see it now in the final or replace system of records as replace, reveal status. So again, if SSIS for some reason blanks out the reveal status and we run that 5:15 store procedure, it's going to correct this by changing it back, the blank field, back to replace. So that's what that's for. Okie doke. So the next thing we are going to do is we are going to force an exception, a replace to blank exception, or final to blank, because replace is looked upon as being final. And we're going to go, first we're going to do this by changing the end date here to the same as the start date. Then we're going to run that 5:15 store procedure, scheduled store procedure, and if it's greater, or if it's today's date or greater than today's date, it's going to move that record from the holding tank to the primary table. And then I am going to go to the acceptance testing interface where you can edit anything and change it to blank to force or to mimic a final to blank exception. Hope that makes sense. So let's just do this. So right now I am going to go to the interface, update holding tank end date. So this is the interface where you might say, hey, got 2 weeks isn't long enough, let me extend that week, and you can change it here. But what we're doing here is I am going to make this the same as the start date, save my changes, and then I am going to run the store procedure that will go through all the records in the holding tank, check the end date. If it's today or greater than today, then it's going to move that record from the holding tank to the primary table, and that's when you cannot edit it anymore. So let's do that. So I'll click here, and what it just did, it went back to the APPE all interface, and notice now It's no longer in the holding tank, right? You don't see that holding tank start end date selection here. And notice this is read only, so you can only view details, read only in form view, right here. So notice if you can edit this, if you see a little pencil here, meaning you can edit this in form view, you can also edit it in form view right here. So let's go back. So as you can see here, if you move to the very right for this record here, you'll notice that it has me here because I was the person that last modified this record right here on this date. So what I am going to do is blank this out. So we are going to, remember that interface we went to earlier, acceptance testing? We are going there right now, and what I'm going to do is force or mimic an exception. I am going to blank this out because in the acceptance testing interface I can edit this. So I will select blank, save my changes, and voila. So notice here, again, it's not in the holding tank. We know that. That record is no longer in the holding tank. It's not there, but it is in our final or replace system of records table. You can see it here. So when I run that store procedure, what that 5:15 a.m. store procedure, what it's going to do, it also does a cursor, like it did with the holding tank. It does a cursor on the PSPE final or replace system of records table. It checks to see if this if this record resides in the primary table, because it could reside either in the holding tank or the primary table. And if it does reside in the primary table, it's going to check the reveal status. And if it's blank, it's going to correct it with replace. And then it's also going to send out a notification to the PharmD advisor. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's run that store procedure that runs at 5:15 a.m. before the 5:45 SIS job. So SIS runs its student information system, runs their job that pulls our PSP comments to their system. And we also have another job at 6 a.m. that runs our SSIS packages. So I'll go ahead and click here. Notice it's going to go to our APPER, and notice it corrected back to replace, and it's going to send out a notification to me. I should get a red dot on my Outlook pretty soon. Dun, 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 dun. Yes indeed. OEIS team. Click here. It says right here, this is a notification that PSP records reveal status has changed from final to blank, which is an exception. Corrections has been made, and I can click here to look at a report for analysis. So this is the date that it changed to blank, but it fixed it, this store procedure. So it looked at the system of records, found and replace, and corrected it with replace. Pretty cool. So we have this report here, and in this report you can also see it. Let me close this guy here. If we come over here and we go to view, we go to reports, you can always see this exception report right here. Okie doke. So one thing to note, let's go back to tools. We have this exception notification to recipient here. Let me click on that. So right here, the reason why the notification was sent to me, because I'm right in this listing here, this notification to recipient interface here. And definitely Catherine will need to be in this table as well. And so I can add her, add new record, go to my drop down for Catherine, select her, save my changes, add successful. She's right over here. But I am doing acceptance testing for myself right now, just me. So let me delete her just for now. I'll delete her. It's going to ask for confirmation. Are you sure you want to delete this record? Yes, I am. I'll click OK, and voila. Save my changes, delete successful. Don't forget to save your changes after a deletion. So you can If I click here.
To save your changes, click the Save Changes button on the top toolbar. If you delete a record, you still need to click the Save Changes button after confirming deletion.
Okie doke, so that's my reminder. I can always click here. And there's a from recipient. So what is that? So this gives me my closing salutation on the notification, name, the title, and who the email is coming from. So what you see over here, the closing salutation, kind regards, the title, and who it's coming from, that's coming from that interface. I hard-coded OEIS team, though, right here. So it's coming from this interface where we can always make changes to it. So let's go back to our APPE all. And so again here, if I click on it, I cannot make any changes to it because it's in our primary table. Let's look at our update history. So if we look at this, remember the first thing we did was I went to my acceptance testing interface to make it blank so I can demo this. Then I changed it to final, then I changed it to exclude, then I changed it to replace, and then I went to the acceptance testing interface and I blanked it out to mimic an exception. And notice you don't see that replace, that it changed it back to replace, because this interface is at the user level. So it only shows an history of what the user updated. So remember it changed it back to replace? That was from the store procedure that's going to run at 5:15 a.m. in the morning. So again, this only displays what the user updated. So close this guy, and we will look at some things here. So tools, what do I have here? I have a scheduler here, which you guys can use. Let's go back and just see what we have here in tools that can be helpful for you guys. There's a PSP is ready, is final, dashboard view. So I got this view from the OEIS production database. I think it's a view that Steven wrote a while back. So I pulled that data here and I get my is ready and is final information. I can filter on any field here. This is pretty cool. So I'm using Link Server. So with Link Server, when you launch this interface, it's in real time. It just pulls the data from our OEIS production table or view, and so I can grab it here real time. Pretty slick. So let's go back to our APPE all interface. Anything else that's so holding tank weeks. So this is the interface where you can change the number of weeks. Right now it's at 2. Let's go back. What else do I have here? Tools, holding tank maximum date. Remember I said you have to have a maximum date. You don't want to bleed over to the following year. Right now it's at December 30th, 2022. Catherine's probably going to change that at some point. So yeah, we have a holding tank max date interface. I'll go back. What else do we have here? Under tools. So this is the store procedure that runs at 5:15 a.m. in the morning, and it does a cursor on both the holding tank and the system of record final replace table. So it does it on the holding tank because it checks the end date, the holding tank end date. So if it's today or greater, it moves the record from the holding tank to the primary table, and it also does a cursor and looks through every single record in the system of record final replace table, and if it resides in the primary table, then it will check the reveal status field. If it's blank, that means that's an exception, and it will correct it from the final and replace system of records table, and also send out a notification and also update an exception table for analysis. So that's what that does. Oops, why did I get out of that? Tools. So there's a store procedure just to initialize staging, and this is the same thing. It's just that this gives you, it populates test data like what I have here. Peter Piper picked a pack of pickled peppers. If Peter Piper picked a pack of pickled peppers, where's the pack of pickled peppers Peter Piper picked? And this runs this store procedure. What it does, it runs that notification. So it sends out the notification if I click here, the exception notification. So yeah, so I pretty much covered it. What else is there to look at? We saw reports, we saw documentation, graphs. So this is data visualization. If I click on, we have 3 types of data visualization or dashboards. We have Tableau, really slick. With Tableau, we use the Tableau JavaScript API event listeners. So if I hold down the control key, I click here, you can see it here. If I click on another object, it totals it up. I can deselect it and it subtracts it. Pretty cool. So you can do a lot of cool things. You can select objects and you can save it to your database. You can drill down to other dashboards. You can pass parameters to other interfaces. Pretty slick. And let's look at the other two dashboards. SSRS, this is reporting services. Here's our reveal status counts. You can see that. Here's the region counts, and pretty slick. You can export it to various formats such as Word, Excel, PowerPoint, PDF, and print it out as well. Pretty cool. So let's close this guy. And last but not least, my favorite data visualization or dashboard, Telerik. Pretty cool, and the reason why it's so cool is because you have a grid where you can filter on this grid and it's going to be reflected on this graph. Pretty slick. And I can select objects like the JavaScript API. In fact, I do not have to hold down the control key. I just click here. You can see it up here. Click here again, and it's like a calculator. Click here again, and I can deselect it. It subtracts it. Pretty cool. Deselected. Or select it again. So like the JavaScript API event listeners, I can select objects, save it to my database, drill down to other dashboards, and pass parameters to other interfaces. Pretty slick. It does a lot more. It's really cool. So let's go back. And did I cover everything? So one thing to note, so 2 weeks ago, I did a narrative video on this about 2 weeks ago. So with narrative videos, let me just show you this. You can have chapter timelines. So let me show you.
Because these columns have
timelines. So let me go down here, click on Show More. So for example, if you want to go directly to a certain section, you can. So you can go to a topic of concern or interest. For example, I can click on Start Demo if I want to bypass all the verbiage, the documentation verbiage. I can click here.
And we are going to
go
demo
directly to that section. Pretty slick. So let me close this guy. So you have that. So I think I'm pretty much done here. You have your tools here. Remember, we have our sections notification 2 here. You can select it from here. Max holding date, tank end date. Set the number of weeks. That is ready as final. So you have stuff here too under our tools header. So I think I covered everything. So just to summarize, the major enhancements is that you have a holding tank. So when your records are in the holding tank, your final replace records are in the holding tank, you can edit it and do whatever you choose. But once that expiration date passes, if it's today's date or greater than today's date, then the store procedure is going to move that record from the holding tank to the primary table, and that's when it's set in stone and you cannot edit it anymore. It also checks the system of record final replace table, looks at every single record, checks to see if that record resides in the primary table, because again, it can reside either in the holding tank or primary table. If it does reside in the primary table, it checks that reveal status field, and if that reveal status field is blank, that means there's an exception there, and it's going to correct that from the final replace system of records table and send out a notification, and it updates an exception table for analysis. Pretty slick. So I hope I covered everything. I hope this makes sense. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.